This is Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad on Tuesday, 14th September 2021, Hindi Divas. On Hindi Divas, I wish to recount how my father's younger brother Narayan Dutt, a Kannadiga, became a famous Hindi scholar and editor. My uncle Narayan Dutt was editor of the Hindi literary magazines Navneet and Dharam Yog, and he also founded PTI's Hindi service, PTI Bhasha, of the Press Trust of India, and he headed it for many years. The Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha was established by Mahatma Gandhi and Annie Besant in Chennai around 1918. And my great grandfather, Vajapayee and Venkata Subbaiah, he was my father's mother's father. He was a close associate of Mahatma Gandhi. And when Mahatma Gandhi returned to India from South Africa in 1915, he chose Gopal Krishna Gokhale as his mentor and his guru, even though Gokhale was only 4 years older than Gandhi. And my great grandfather, Vajapayee and Venkata Subbaiah, he was a protege of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, having joined Gokhale in Pune immediately after completing his MA, and he was one of the key figures in the Servants of India Society. So Gokhale advised Gandhiji that before he started taking an active part in the freedom movement, he should first spend a couple of years traveling all across the country to understand the problems of the poor. And Gokhale delegated my great grandfather, Vajapayee and Venkata Subbaiah, my father's mother's father, to take Mahatma Gandhi all across the country and educate them about India. And Mahatma Gandhi appointed my great grandfather, Vajpayee Venkat Subbiah, to head the Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha in Chennai, as well as the branch of the Harijan Sevak Sangh in Chennai. And the British then sentenced my great grandfather to long prison terms, and so my teenaged paternal grandmother took over as the de facto manager of the Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha in Chennai, running its day to day affairs. And even after her marriage to my paternal grandfather, Holy Narsipur Yoga Narasimham in Mysuru, and he was a famous Sanskrit scholar and principal of the Maharaja Sanskrit colleges in Mysuru and Bengaluru. So my grandmother, Saraswatama, she continued her association with the Dakshin Bharat Hindi Prachar Sabha. And during a visit to their home, a renowned Hindi Brahmin scholar from Varanasi, he denigrated and belittled the way Madarasis spoke Hindi. And this scholar from Varanasi, he very arrogantly asserted that Madarasis would never be able to master Hindi. And my paternal grandfather, he pointed to his 6 year old son, my uncle Narayan Dutt, who was serving this visitor tea and snacks. And my grandfather told this visitor, "This young boy will soon become a great Hindi scholar, far, far better than any North Indian." And my a paternal grandfather, Holy Narsipur Yoga Narasimham, he was a leading music composer and vocalist, and he used to perform every year at the famous Harivallabh Sangeet Sammelan in Jalandhar in Punjab. And so, on his next trip to Jalandhar, my grandfather took my 6-year-old uncle Narayan Dutt to Kurukshetra, and he admitted him into the Gurukula at Kurukshetra to study Hindi there. And after my uncle passed out from the Kurukshetra Gurukul, he joined Lahore University to do his BA in Hindi and Urdu, but he could sense that the communal situation in Lahore was becoming really bad. So after he completed his first year, he took a transfer to Haridwar and he obtained the Vidyalankar title from Haridwar. And even as a student, my uncle Narayan Dutt, he became very well known for his numerous translations from Hindi into Kannada and vice versa, from Kannada into Hindi. And then he obtained postgraduate degrees in history and political science from Varanasi. And then when Sri Gopal Nevatia and Ratanlal Joshi, they started this literary magazine, Navaneet Hindi Digest in Pune. So then my uncle Narayan Dutt joined as the deputy to Ratanlal Joshi. And later he had a long stint as editor of Navaneet magazine for several decades. And then when Navaneet had to shut down in the 1980s, Narayan Dutt, he became editor of the leading Hindi literary magazine Dharam Yug. And soon after that, he founded PTI's Hindi service, PTI Bhasha, and he headed that for many years. And he won numerous awards and honorary degrees. And his good friend Atal Bihari Vajpayee marveled at his mastery of Hindi literature and poetry. And Vajpayee recommended Narayan Dutt for many awards and honorary doctorates, and several biographies of and profiles of Narayan Dutt have been published both in Hindi and in Kannada. And Bombay University instituted a lecture in his memory, and so have several organizations in Mysuru. And it was quite gratifying to me that shortly before he passed away in 2014, my uncle Narayan Dutt approved of my Hindi when I was interviewed on Doordarshan and Lok Sabha TV and Rajya Sabha TV in Hindi. And speaking of Doordarshan Hindi, the highly Sanskritized and formal Hindi of All India Radio was the brainchild of Balakrishna Vishwanath Keskar. He was the Minister of Information and Broadcasting in Jawaharlal Nehru's cabinet. And Keskar, very highly educated and cultured, B.B. Keskar, he was a patrician, elitist, snob who looked down upon the uneducated masses. And Keskar had all the intellectual and cultural arrogance and superiority complex of a Pune Brahmin and a French intellectual. He had a doctorate from the Sorbonne, and he was also a famous Sanskrit scholar, studied at the Kashi Vidyapit, as well as taught there as a distinguished professor. And he was also very accomplished classical musician who taught Drupad in Pune and Varanasi. So, overall, an insufferable intellectual snob. But he thought that the role of radio and television was for enhancing the cultural and educational sophistication of the masses. And being a distinguished teacher of Sanskrit at the Kashi Vidyapit in Varanasi, Keskar wanted the masses all across the country to speak the Sanskrit of Kalidasa and Panini, and he argued that Sanskrit would unify the country just as Hebrew had been revived in the recently formed nation of Israel. And Jawaharlal Nehru objected that the Hindi news bulletins could barely be understood by most people in North India. But Keskar argued with Nehru that the higher the Sanskrit content and the lower the Arabic and Farsi Persian content, the greater would be the comprehensibility of the Hindi programs of AIR among the populations of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Bengal, Odisha, etc., because these were areas outside the Farsi Arabic influence. And also drawing on his very close associations with leading French intellectuals, Malraux, Romerola, and others. Keskar had a doctorate from the Sorbonne, and Keskar convinced Nehru that the function of radio news bulletins was to improve the appreciation of the general populace for literature and drama and poetry. Never mind that one needed to turn to a dictionary to comprehend the news bulletins. Okay. Yeah. So please subscribe to my YouTube and IGTV channels, and please follow my Twitter account at RVP, as well as my LinkedIn and my Facebook and Instagram accounts. My Twitter account is at RVP. This is Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad saying goodbye on Tuesday, 14th September 2021. Have a great day.